Hello, this is Jess here. I want to talk about the Quantum Leap episode and how it kicked my ass. But first, I want to talk about this little sequence here. As you can tell, I was trying to imitate the original opening to Quantum Leap as best I could. We had a lot of technical problems on this episode, a lot of them related to the green screen because the lighting in the basement is a little inconsistent right now due to a whole bunch of issues. And no matter what Matt and I tried to do, it wouldn't uh, quite correct as well as we hoped. And I did like 15 tries at it, and Matt took another try at it, and then I decided to adjust the background a little bit, and even then, there were a few shots that aren't quite salvageable. Part of that is that I'm using Movave, which isn't quite the best video editing software, but it's one of the better ones you can get for a PC, so that's pretty much what I'm stuck with. And there are some that are better, but they're all a lot more expensive and I can't really afford them. But the music here is great, and it was done for me by Matt. Now I want to get into how this episode came about. Last year, I told the cast and crew and other people who had helped me out on various videos that they could pick a movie for me to watch for an episode of Did I Get What I Paid For in lieu of getting them something for Christmas. And Danny, who was the voice of Nurse Duck, noticed that I had the box The Complete Quantum Leap, and that was his pick. And immediately I knew I wanted to parody the opening and had an idea of what the sketches were going to be. And after that, the episode sort of wrote itself. I pick the episodes that actually get reviewed when I do the ones of TV series, more or less based on how they are ranked on various fan sites. And so it came down to the Leap Homes Part 1 and 2, The Wrong Stuff, and Mirror Image. And I think, had I known how difficult this episode was going to turn out to be, that I would have gone more for the re-episodes. But then again, having it be double-sized is sort of expected for a season opener. But yeah, this green screening here is awful. I apologize for that. Hopefully next time I use the green screen, it won't be this bad. I actually like the hovering cape effect, but there are parts in the episode where the speckling during the green screen actually is on me and not the chair, and that's kind of bad. But considering how bad it was before we did all the filters and everything on it, it's actually a lot better than it was. You guys really don't want to see how bad it was originally. But yeah, the idea for the sketches for this week, or for this episode, was that we were just going to take the mold of almost every episode of Quantum Leap and do sort of our take on that. Since I'm the main reviewer on the series, it was decided that I would be the Sam role and Matt would be Al. And that Nick, who's already a computer, would be in place of Ziggy, who was a computer. And that was more or less how it all went down. Now, as for these backgrounds, I went on Google and I looked up tacky 80s room designs. And I looked at all these different rooms. A lot of them were like just god awful. And so I came across all these 80s and 90s backgrounds and rooms. And this looked like the most late 80s, early 90s awful that I could find. And so that is what I went with. Matt's outfit Well, we thought that on Quantum Leap, Al was always wearing these outrageous clothes, and so we took my Marty McFly jacket and a beach towel and a formal tie, and we sort of mishmashed them together to make that sort of outfit. And for the hand link, I don't think most people notice this, but it changes from sketch to sketch. And that was actually making fun of an actual error that occurs a lot, especially in early first and second season episodes of Quantum Leap, before they had settled on a consistent look for the hand link, which didn't happen until the late second season or early third. I forget which is strange because none of the episodes that we're actually reviewing are from that period of the show. Maybe I should have, and since I actually have a box set of just the first season, maybe I'll go back and review that, but probably not. I mean, the only reason I have to do that is that Matt's theme song is great, and I would love to use it again. But recycling a theme song being the only reason to do an episode isn't really that good of a reason to do it. As for the writing of this episode, on paper it was probably the easiest episode to write I've ever done. I started scribbling down notes as I watched the episode and came up with a whole bunch of materials, and a lot of the jokes were more or less there, just waiting to be mined out. You know, a lot of the episodes I'm going through the movie multiple times, trying to mine some joke out of it, and depending on the thing I'm reviewing, it can be really, really easy or really, really hard. Sometimes it's because the movie's good and there's not really much to riff on. Other times it's that the movie is so awful that it is almost painful to watch it. Quantum Leap, as I say in the episode itself, was a really good show, and rewatching the episodes that I chose to gauge the value of the entire set was rather fun. And I still had to make fun of it anyway. And so I took a few stabs that were maybe undeserved. The joke about Al climbing up the ranks during the tailhook scandal, which, you know, there were naval officers who either climbed the ranks because they harassed women and got them to close the books or say they lied about rape allegations. And there were those who climbed the ranks by blackmailing other officers who did that sort of thing. Do I think the character of Al was involved in that sort of stuff? No, of course not. The series makes it pretty clear that he was a womanizer, but at the same time, and this was progressive for the 80s and 90s, mind you, but he had a consent kink. Getting a woman's consent to do whatever he was doing was something he got off on, which you don't see much on TV now, and you certainly didn't see a lot of it back then. There are a couple of other jokes here and there that I don't think were 100% deserved, but most of them I stand by. There's one more like that, and I'll talk about it when we get there. Probably will take up the entire segment, but yeah, most of the jokes, especially in the first part of the leap home, I don't really have much to say about because this section had a particularly solid part of the script. It's also a very solid episode, so it's really hard to make fun of. As I said, it's probably one of the best of the entire show. So I think I will do a bit of a time jump and I'll skip ahead. Going into part 2, there's just like a small editing error at the beginning, which was unavoidable. It was not noticed when I did the 17 edits that I went through. And yeah, this episode was a pain in the ass to edit. Anytime you're doing green screens, especially overlays on top of green screens, there are a lot of things to go through. And then you have to go through and make sure all your profanity is bleeped out or inverted. So it was a major hassle. This is surprisingly not the worst edit I've ever had to do. That would actually be Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla, the pilot episode of season 0, where the camera had so many problems that I almost had to... Actually, no, I did have to reshoot it twice. I considered just going back and reshooting the entire... Well, not the entire episode of Quantum Leap, but a good portion of it to decrease the green screen problem, but there was only one problem. I had a virtual job interview between the time I shot the first part and by the time we were doing the editing. And in order to do that, my hair, which was not the longest it's ever been, but getting close to the point where I would probably be getting a haircut anyway in a week or two. So I went and got my haircut for the interview. And then I looked at the edits and it looked awful. And it would be really noticeable that I would go from having long-ish hair, at least longish hair by my standards, to having my typical short summer haircut. So I would either have to reshoot the entire episode or just have a few scenes where my hair was noticeably shorter, and neither of those options seemed like very good choices to me, especially since most episodes of Did I Get What I Paid For I shoot in 2 to 3 days, and this episode took 3 days. Day 1, I shot just the sketches. The second day, I shot all the scenes for The Leap Home Part 1 and 2. And then the third day, I shot the stuff for both The Wrong Stuff and Mirror Image. Plus, there was a fourth day where I actually reshot a joke, and I'll get to that. But as easy as the script was to write, the shoot was incredibly exhausting. And then on top of that, it turned into a week and a half long edit. And even then, this is the best we could possibly get, given the equipment that we had available. So, sometimes I have really, really cool ideas, but I can't exactly get what I was going for. And it's sort of like Icarus flying too close to the sun. I feel a greater understanding for directors like Ed Wood now than I think I used to before I started doing YouTube. I used to think Ed Wood was just a complete lunatic who had nothing of value. Now I see he actually had some really cool ideas. He just lacked the talent, money, and resources to do them justice. I mean, he was a hack, but he was doing the best he could with what he had. And I think if you gave someone like Ed Wood a real budget, you would actually have someone like Michael Bay. And if you gave me a budget, who knows what I could do. I'd like to think I could do better than I was if I had, real equipment, a real writing rig. I'd like to think I could do a lot better if I had a real lighting rig, a better camera, stuff like that. But I don't, so I get by with what I got. Again, I don't really have a lot to say about this episode. So, I think I'll skip ahead again to the bits on the wrong stuff. The flickering effect on Matt isn't as bad as it is on me, but only because he's supposed to be a hologram. With him, that sort of helps with the effect, but with me, not so much. But I wanted to talk about this episode in depth, or particularly just one part of the episode. You see, there's a joke here that I was iffy on when I wrote it. And I recorded it. And I think I'll pause here to show you the actual clip of what I said. And I'll explain why I didn't use that joke when I'm done. Winger changes his mind about the ethics of his experiment. After all, this is 1961, the age of Tuskegee and MK Ultra. Why use chimps when there are brown people and prison labor readily available? Yeah, you can see why that joke was cut. Even when I wrote it, I knew I would have to be very careful with how I said it, so that the sarcasm would be absolutely clear. And I was so uncomfortable with it, even after I did like 7 or 8 takes of that. I did what I probably should have done from the get-go, which was I talked to some friends who were in the affected minority groups. My friend Indigo, who I have known from various fanfic writing groups, farther back than either of us cares to admit, along with longtime parody era films contributor Marche Hall, who you guys probably remember from the Jack and the Beanstalk episode. She was the voice of Hecate Harmonica. Both of them told me, yeah, that joke, while there was a bit of honesty to it, was maybe a bit too on the nose. Of course, actually, if you look into history, it might not have even been that. You see, if Winger had been working for Air Force Command or the CIA, who would often operate out of Cape Kennedy, then yeah, they would have a point. But NASA was better on civil rights than most of the alphabet soup. I'm not saying they were perfect because, the first black astronaut wasn't inducted into the Corps until the late 70s or early 80s. And the first chimpanzee was inducted in 1959. So, yeah. But the Army and the Air Force didn't have that many African Americans in high command positions anywhere, save for segregated units, back when that was a thing. But NASA, well, a lot of the mathematicians, some of the scientists, and some of the engineers were African Americans. So it's not like they would go out of their way to use them as human crash test dummies. In fact, the joke I made in the revised version came from me digging into the actual history of how helmet tests were done for NASA at that time. They really did test on chimps like that, but the tests were discontinued for the very reason science lady said. Chimps have different musculature and bone density than humans, so even if the helmet protected chimps, they didn't usually work on humans. So, yeah, they would make the helmets, they would protect the chimps, and then human beings wearing the helmets would still either die or be paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of their lives. So the test was no good. But once they stopped testing on animals, they tested on corpses. I think I'm going to cut it off here and move on to the very few bits I have to say on mirror image. I want to talk about this final sketch here. The whole reason that we have Matt sort of disappear after the self-deleting time paradox is that, as I mentioned, Matt moved, and he won't be able to do as many videos for me anymore. Maybe one or two guest appearances at Christmas time when he comes to visit, but yeah, he'll still be billed as an associate producer emeritus, but he's not going to be playing an active role in the channel as much anymore. I've tried to think of a good way to write him out that we could work into the story organically, so it just sort of happened that we sort of deleted Matt from history. At least for now. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say about this episode. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe, and oh yeah, go to patreon.com/ParityErrorFilms. Maybe that way I can get a new lighting rig. We'll make sure that green screening doesn't have this problem again in the future.